John Harrison was a man of routine and stability. At 35, he had carved out a life for himself that many would envy: a successful career as a civil engineer, a comfortable home in the suburbs of Chicago, and a seemingly perfect marriage to Emily. They had met in college, their romance blooming over late-night study sessions and shared dreams. They were married for 10 years, their bond seemingly unbreakable. Emily, at 34, was an elementary school teacher known for her warmth and kindness. To their friends and family, they were the ideal couple, happy, grounded, and devoted to one another. However, the veneer of their perfect life began to crack on a chilly November morning. John had always prided himself on his attention to detail, and this trait had served him well in his professional life, but it was his meticulous nature that now led him to a discovery that would upend everything he had believed about his marriage. It all started with a misplaced phone. John was tidying up the bedroom when he noticed Emily's phone lying on the nightstand. It was unusual for her to leave it unattended, especially when she was at work. Curiosity got the better of him, and he picked it up, intending to place it in its usual spot. As he turned it over, a notification popped up on the screen, an image from a video. It was a thumbnail that John didn't recognize, but what struck him was Emily's face, her expression one of intense intimacy. His heart raced as he opened the video. What he saw was devastating: Emily, in a compromising position with her boss, Richard Thomas. The video was explicit, and the betrayal was unmistakable. Richard, at 40, was a powerful figure in the corporate world, known for his charm and charisma. He had always been a friend of John's, and the thought that he could be involved with Emily was shocking beyond belief. John's mind raced as he watched the video. Emily and Richard had been having an affair for months, it seemed. The video was dated just a few weeks prior. It was a cruel twist of fate that Richard had been a frequent visitor to their home for dinner parties and social gatherings. John felt the walls closing in, the weight of betrayal pressing down on him. As the video ended, John's hands trembled. He felt a surge of anger, not just towards Emily, but also towards Richard. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was deeply personal. Richard had crossed a line that John had believed to be unassailable. John had always seen Richard as a mentor and a friend, someone he could trust. Now, that trust was shattered, and John's sense of betrayal was compounded by the realization that this affair was ongoing and intimate. John sat on the edge of the bed, the video replaying in his mind. His thoughts raced as he tried to make sense of the situation. The affair had been going on behind his back, and now Emily was coming home, carrying news that would further complicate their lives. She had mentioned in passing that she might be pregnant, but John had dismissed it as a distant possibility, until now. The sound of the front door opening brought John back to reality. Emily's cheerful voice echoed through the house as she greeted him. He heard her footsteps approaching the bedroom, and he braced himself for the conversation that was about to unfold. Emily entered the room, her face lit up with a radiant smile. She held a small, white plastic stick in her hand, and her eyes were glistening with tears of joy. "John, I have great news," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "I'm pregnant." She held out the positive pregnancy test, her hands shaking. John's heart sank as he looked at the test. The news was overwhelming, but it was overshadowed by the betrayal he had just uncovered. Emily's joy was palpable, but John's face was a mask of cold detachment. He struggled to maintain his composure as he processed the enormity of the situation. "Emily," he said slowly, his voice measured but cold, "I've just seen something that changes everything." He took a deep breath and walked to the dresser where he had placed a suitcase and a stack of documents. Emily's face turned to confusion as she followed his movements. John picked up the suitcase and placed it on the bed, opening it to reveal its contents. He handed her the suitcase and the divorce papers, his gaze steady. "I called Richard's wife this morning," he said, his voice edged with bitterness. "I told her that her husband is going to be a daddy. The delivery truck is waiting outside. You're moving out." Emily's joy evaporated, replaced by a look of sheer horror. Her eyes widened as she took in the divorce papers and the videotape John held out. "What is this?" she stammered, her voice trembling. "It's a video of you and Richard," John said, his voice flat. "I've watched it, and now I'm done. The trust we had is gone, Emily. I can't pretend this didn't happen." Emily's face turned ashen as she realized the gravity of the situation. Her legs gave way, and she sank onto the bed, her hands covering her face as she wept. The weight of John's words and the evidence of her betrayal were too much to bear. She had come home expecting to share happy news, only to be confronted with the end of her marriage and the exposure of her infidelity. John watched her with a mixture of anger and sadness. The betrayal had cut deep, and the pain was raw. He had never imagined that their life together would end in such a dramatic and painful way. But now, with the evidence in front of him and the reality of the situation sinking in, he knew there was no turning back. As Emily packed her things in the suitcase, her movements were slow and methodical, her face wet with tears. John stood by, watching the process with a heavy heart. The dreams they had shared, the life they had built, seemed to crumble before his eyes. The once happy home now felt cold and empty, a stark reminder of the trust that had been broken. John's decision was final, and he was resolute. The marriage was over, and the path ahead would be one of healing and rebuilding. As Emily left, John felt the weight of his actions, but he also felt a sense of closure. The journey was far from over, but the first step had been taken. The months following Emily's departure were a whirlwind of legal battles and emotional turmoil for John Harrison. The house, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, now echoed with silence. The echoes of betrayal haunted him, and every corner of the home seemed to remind him of what he had lost. As he navigated the complexities of divorce and adjusted to life alone, he found himself grappling with a tumultuous mix of anger, grief, and confusion. John was determined to uncover the full extent of the betrayal. He began to delve into the details of Emily's affair, motivated by a need for clarity and a desire to understand why his marriage had been shattered. The video he had discovered was just the beginning. It was clear that there was more to the story. One evening, as John sorted through the stack of paperwork related to the divorce, he found himself reflecting on the past. The video had been a devastating revelation, but it was the betrayal by someone he had considered a friend that was particularly crushing. Richard Thomas, at 40, was a figure of success and influence in the corporate world, and the thought of him being involved in such deceit was a bitter pill to swallow. Richard had often been a guest at their home, and John had admired him for his charisma and achievements. The betrayal felt like a personal assault, an erosion of trust that extended beyond his marriage. John decided to take a proactive approach. He reached out to Richard's wife, Sarah, a 38-year-old art gallery owner. Sarah had always been a gracious and kind woman, someone John had respected and liked. He wanted to offer her the same clarity he sought for himself. He contacted her and arranged a meeting. Sarah received John's call with a mixture of surprise and apprehension. When they met in a quiet cafe, she looked every bit the poised and collected professional, though John could see the strain beneath her composed exterior. The meeting was somber and fraught with tension. Sarah listened in shocked silence as John recounted what he had discovered. She was visibly shaken, her hands trembling as she clutched a cup of coffee. The revelation of Richard's infidelity was a devastating blow, and it was clear that Sarah was struggling to process the information. "I never imagined." Sarah's voice faltered as she tried to find the right words. "Richard and Emily. I had no idea. I trusted him. I trusted them both." John nodded, his expression one of grim understanding. "I felt the same way. It's hard to grasp how someone you thought you knew so well could be capable of such betrayal." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and she took a deep breath to steady herself. "I need to know more," she said softly. "I need to understand why this happened. Richard has always been so charming, so convincing. I never thought." John watched as Sarah struggled with her emotions. He offered what little insight he had, but he could see that Sarah was grappling with a profound sense of betrayal. The meeting ended on a somber note, with John and Sarah both feeling the weight of their shared pain. They parted ways with a mutual understanding that their paths were now intertwined by a cruel twist of fate. In the weeks that followed, John and Sarah found solace in their growing friendship. They bonded over their shared experience, finding comfort in each other's company. John found that talking to Sarah helped him process his own emotions, and Sarah appreciated the empathy and support John offered. Their conversations often delved into the nature of trust, betrayal, and the complexities of human relationships. John continued to sift through the remnants of his past with Emily. He found old letters and photographs, relics of a time when their life together seemed perfect. Each discovery was a bittersweet reminder of what had been lost. He also reviewed the divorce settlement, working with his lawyer to ensure that everything was handled fairly. The legal process was a necessary but painful step, and John focused on getting through it with as much dignity as he could muster. As the days turned into weeks, John began to notice changes in himself. The anger that had initially consumed him began to wane, replaced by a more reflective and contemplative mindset. He realized that the betrayal, while deeply painful, had also prompted him to reevaluate his own life and his own values. He started to explore new interests and hobbies, seeking ways to rebuild his sense of self. John also became more involved in his work, throwing himself into projects with renewed vigor. The demands of his job provided a welcome distraction from the emotional turmoil he was experiencing. He found satisfaction in the challenges of engineering, channeling his energy into solving problems and achieving professional goals. One evening, while reviewing documents related to the divorce, John received a call from Sarah. She was clearly agitated, her voice tense and hurried. "John, I need to talk to you. Richard is making things difficult. He's been evasive and confrontational, and I'm not sure how to handle it." John listened attentively as Sarah explained the situation. Richard had become increasingly defensive, denying any wrongdoing and trying to shift the blame onto others. His attempts to manipulate the situation were frustrating for Sarah, who was struggling to cope with the emotional fallout from the affair. "I'm sorry you're going through this," John said, his voice filled with sympathy. "I can't imagine how hard it must be to deal with Richard's behavior. If there's anything I can do to help, just let me know." Sarah expressed her gratitude for John's support. Their friendship had become a source of strength for both of them, and they found comfort in knowing that they were not alone in their struggles. As the final stages of the divorce approached, John felt a sense of closure beginning to take shape. The emotional journey had been long and arduous, but he was slowly coming to terms with the reality of his situation. The healing process was ongoing, and he knew that there were still challenges ahead, but he was determined to move forward, to rebuild his life and find a new sense of purpose. In the midst of this personal upheaval, John and Sarah continued to support each other. Their bond grew stronger, forged through their shared experiences and mutual understanding. They found solace in their conversations, and their friendship became a source of hope and healing. As the chapter of his life with Emily drew to a close, John was faced with the daunting task of starting anew. The betrayal had left deep scars, but it had also prompted him to reflect on his own values and priorities. He was ready to embrace the future with a sense of resilience and determination, knowing that the road ahead would be one of growth and self-discovery. Winter had settled over Chicago, and the city was draped in a blanket of snow. The cold was biting, but John Harrison felt an unexpected warmth as he looked out the window of his downtown apartment. The apartment was sparsely decorated, a reflection of his new solitary life. The previous months had been a whirlwind of legal battles, emotional healing, and personal growth, and John was finally beginning to feel a sense of stability. Emily's departure had left a gaping void in his life, but it had also prompted him to reassess his own priorities and rebuild his life. He had focused on his work, his burgeoning friendship with Sarah, and his own personal development. The emotional scars of the past were slowly healing, and John was beginning to see the possibility of a new beginning. One cold morning, as John was sipping his coffee and reviewing documents, he received an unexpected knock on the door. When he opened it, he was met with the sight of Emily standing on the threshold. Her face was pale and drawn, and her eyes were red from crying. She was clutching a large envelope and had a look of desperate determination. "John," she said, her voice trembling, "I need to talk to you. Please let me in." John hesitated for a moment, his emotions a turbulent mix of anger and curiosity. He had not seen Emily since her departure, and the thought of facing her again stirred up a whirlwind of memories and unresolved feelings. Finally, he stepped aside, allowing her to enter. Emily looked around the apartment, taking in the stark and unfamiliar surroundings. She seemed to shrink under the weight of the reality that she was now an outsider in John's life. John gestured for her to sit on the couch, and she took a seat, her hands clutching the envelope tightly. "I know you're probably not interested in hearing what I have to say," Emily began, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I've come to talk to you, to explain, and to ask for your forgiveness." John remained standing, his arms crossed, his expression guarded. "Emily, after everything that's happened, I don't know what there is left to say. What could you possibly offer now that would change anything?" Emily took a deep breath, her eyes welling with tears. "I've been seeing a therapist. I've been working on understanding why I did what I did, why I let myself get involved in such a terrible situation. I realize now how much I hurt you and how much I betrayed the trust we had. I'm truly sorry." She reached into the envelope and pulled out a document. "I also have the paternity test results," she said, her voice breaking. "I wanted you to know the truth. The baby, it's Richard's. I was scared to face it, but I couldn't live with the lie any longer." John took the document from her, his hands shaking slightly as he read the results. The confirmation that the baby was indeed Richard's was a final, definitive end to the last lingering doubts he had harbored. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was also a relief to have the truth laid bare. Emily continued, her voice filled with anguish. "I know that nothing I say can undo the damage I've caused. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, John. I just wanted to be honest with you and to try to make amends in whatever way I can. I know it's too late for us, but I hope that one day you might find it in your heart to forgive me." John felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Part of him wanted to remain distant and resolute to hold on to the anger and pain that had driven him to end the marriage. But another part of him, the part that had once loved Emily deeply, felt a pang of sympathy and sadness for the woman who had been his wife. "It's hard to hear all of this," John said finally, his voice softer but still tinged with sadness. "The betrayal hurt more than I can describe, and the damage to our lives is something I don't know if we'll ever fully recover from. But I appreciate your honesty, and I can see that you're trying to make things right." Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry for everything. I know that our relationship is over, but I hope that in time you can find some peace and maybe even forgiveness." The room fell silent as John processed Emily's words. The weight of the past months seemed to lift slightly, replaced by a sense of closure. Emily's visit had brought a finality to their relationship that had been missing, and John felt a sense of resolution. Emily stood up to leave, her movements slow and deliberate. She looked at John one last time, her eyes filled with a mixture of regret and hope. "Thank you for listening," she said softly. "I'll be leaving now." John watched her walk to the door, her silhouette framed against the snowy backdrop outside. As she stepped into the cold, he felt a mixture of relief and sadness. The chapter of his life with Emily had come to an end, but it had been a chapter filled with pain, growth, and ultimately, understanding. In the weeks that followed, John continued to focus on his own healing and rebuilding. His relationship with Sarah, which had grown from mutual support into a deep and genuine connection, provided him with a sense of companionship and understanding. They spent time together exploring new interests and supporting each other through their respective challenges. John's work continued to be a source of fulfillment, and he found satisfaction in the challenges and successes it brought. He also began to pursue new hobbies, rediscovering passions that had been buried under the weight of his past. The finality of his relationship with Emily allowed John to move forward with a sense of purpose and clarity. The pain of the betrayal was still present, but it was no longer the defining force in his life. He had come to terms with the past and was ready to embrace the future with hope and resilience. As the winter snow began to melt and the first signs of spring emerged, John looked out at the world with a renewed sense of optimism. The journey had been arduous, but it had also been transformative. He had faced the shattering revelation of betrayal, confronted the truth, and emerged stronger on the other side. John knew that life would continue to present challenges, but he was prepared to face them with the lessons he had learned and the strength he had gained. The end of his marriage with Emily had marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one filled with potential, growth, and the promise of new beginnings. With Sarah by his side and a future full of possibilities ahead, John was ready to embrace the journey and build a life that was truly his own. The past had shaped him, but it was the future that now beckoned with hope and opportunity.